We're going to be looking at Exodus chapter 3 today, and we're going to pick up on the story that we've encountered so far. And we get this dire situation with the Jews being oppressed by the nation of Egypt, and they're being enslaved, and they're crying out to God, and God is starting to hear their cries. And so we get this main character, Moses, who we see kind of has like a special situation around his birth. All the other baby boys are getting killed off, but Moses' mom prepares a little baby boat for him and puts him in the Nile River. And the princess of Egypt ends up finding Moses and winds up bringing him into her own home and raising him like a prince for the Egyptian royalty. And he grows up, figures out he's a Jew, sees the oppression, tries to step in, and when he sees the oppression against the Jewish people and their slavery, he tries to step in, ends up killing an Egyptian, and ends up fleeing and goes away to the land of Midian, kind of some nearby area, to Egypt, and starts living his life. And he ends up getting married to the priest of Midian's daughter, and he's just kind of living his life, and is probably about 80 years old by this time. And we're going to pick up on the story today. And so this is just an amazing story. This is probably a story many of us are familiar with. And so I'm going to jump in looking at God's word today. And so let's read it together and make some comments and thoughts here. Chapter 3, verse 1, it says, "Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God." Right? So Moses just still sheep herding, watching flocks for his father-in-law. And he ends up in the wilderness, on the west side of this wilderness, and he ends up on this mountain called Horeb, the mountain of God. And so some people are kind of wondering where Horeb is. There's a little bit of debate on that. And so some people think it's just another name for Mount Sinai, which we'll talk about kind of more as the story goes on and stuff. But it's not super important necessarily for this. We're not going to go in tons of details. Picking up verse 2, it says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush." Okay, so now the story goes pretty normal. Okay, we got a sheep herder. Okay, we can get around that. Now all of a sudden, verse 2, it says, "The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush." It continues on. It says, "He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed." Right? So just imagine that you're out there in the wilderness and you see this bush that looks like it's on fire, but nothing's burning up. The bush isn't burning up. And it gives us an insight here. It says the angel of the Lord. Now, the angel of the Lord, that term is used in a variety of ways throughout the Old Testament. And I'm not going to go tons into the details of this, but often it is talking about, from what I can tell, is kind of an appearance of the pre-incarnated Jesus. Okay, I'm not going to go into that rabbit trail. That's a whole nother topic I could go on. But whenever it refers to the angel of the Lord, it's kind of like, angel just means messenger. But there's this kind of appearance of God. Sometimes it equates the angel of the Lord with God. And so anyway, so it can kind of be a confusing term. But anyway, the important thing here is that there's this bush that's not burning up, which is really weird. Verse 3, it says, "And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned." So it gets his attention, and he's like, "Hey, I've never seen this before. I'm going to go check it out." Verse 4, it says, "When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see," right? So we got angel of the Lord, okay, when we see capital Lord, that just means Yahweh. That's the name of God. That's his name, the God of the Jews, is Yahweh. And it says, "I turned aside to see this great sight." It says, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him. Okay, the word God here is Elohim, right? So there's different words in here. We got angel of the Lord, we got Yahweh, and we got kind of more of a generic term for God. It says God called him out of the bush, right? So now the story gets really even different. And so he sees the bush, it's not burning up. He goes to check it out, and then all of a sudden God starts talking to him from the bush. "Moses, Moses." Okay, so the burning bush talks to him, and it knows his name. Okay, this will probably get your attention if it would have been you. "And he said, 'Here I am.'" right? Moses just kind of like, okay, this burning bush is talking to me. I'm talking back. Then he said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Um, now we don't really know all the details of this being holy ground, aside from maybe that it's just because the presence of God there. And so he comes in here, starts talking, and says, "Hey, you're in a unique position here. This ground is sacred, it's holy, it's set apart." Verse 6, and he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Now, this is really, really interesting phrase. Remember, so Moses, he grew up in the royal court as an Egyptian, but he did know that he was a Jew. He did know he was a Hebrew. And so now God is coming in and speaking to him in this, really unique type of way. And he really reveals who he is. He's like, "Hey, I want you to know who I am," right? Because like if you got all of a sudden a voice talking to you from a burning bush, you're going to be like, who are you? What? Who is this? This is not an everyday normal experience that I'm going through today. Who is talking to me? And so he says, "I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Right? And so the connection with the Jews goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's really where their story, that's their patriarchs of their culture. That's, so Moses would have known who they are. But look what it says about Moses. It says, "And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God." Right? Sometimes I think we envision seeing God or an angel, and it almost always what happens is the person's afraid. And we would think, "Oh no, I wouldn't be afraid at all." I think we'd be afraid. I think we would act just like Moses, because this is just not a normal thing where a burning bush starts talking to you and says, I'm God. I'm revealing myself to you. And so he's like, "Man, that's a fearful thing to see God." And so he was afraid to look. Verse 7, it says, "Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings." Right? And so God reveals to Abraham that there's more to just like, "Hey, I just wanted to say hi." Right? It's not the intention of God's visitation here, because we see in that story that that God had been hearing the cry. This big, horrible, oppressive thing has been happening, and God says to Moses, like, "I've heard their cry. I've seen what's going on in Egypt there." Verse 8, it says, "And I've come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey." Right? So part of the promise, the covenant that God had with the nation of Israel, the ancestors of Abraham, was, "Hey, I'm going to give you a great nation." Right? We get this in Genesis chapter 12, Genesis chapter 15. This deal that he breaks with them: "I'm going to make you a great nation. You're going to be as many as the stars in the sky." But part of that also was, "I'm going to give you this piece of land. I'm going to give you this spot." Right? And it's described here as good and as flowing with milk and honey. And then he describes it more. It says, "To the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites." All these Zites, right? All these Zites guys. He says, "I'm going to give you their land. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them." Right? So he's describing this situation. Here's what God is pulled to do. Here's what I'm seeing. And I see their oppression. They're crying out to me, and I'm going to act. I'm going to do something on here. Verse 10. Here's how he describes his plan. Here's how it involves Moses now. It says, "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." So all of a sudden he's like, "And Moses, I'm going to enlist you. You're the one. You're going to come, and I'm going to send you to Pharaoh so you can bring his people out of Egypt." Right? So this would have been, like all of a sudden, like, whoa, man, burning bush talking. It's God of my ancestors. And now he says, "You're going to come with me, and you're going to be the instrument used to pull this off." Right? Look at Moses' response. "But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" Right? It's kind of a good question. It's like he's kind of an old guy at this point. Remember, his backstory is, at a time he had actually stepped in to try to, in some ways, rescue his fellow Israelites from Egyptian slavery. He killed a guy. And what happened is then Pharaoh said, now I'm going to kill you. And so he fled. And so that's been kicking in the back of his mind for about 40 years. He's been in the wilderness. Moses has about, kind of 3 different sections of his life. The first 40, he's in Egypt as royalty. The next 40, he's in Midian, getting married, having a family, watching sheep. And now his last 40, he's being enlisted by God to go and help this. And he's like, so this is going to bring up memories like, God, I already tried to do that. I did the best I could. I did this. It didn't turn out. I had to run. I had to run for my life. They were going to kill me. And now you want me to go back? That doesn't make any sense, right? So he's like, who am I that I'm going to go here? Why would they listen to me? I had to flee for my life. It would make no sense. But look at verse 12. This is such an amazing verse. He said, okay, this is God, but I will be with you. Okay, this is the promise of God. That when God sends us out to do the things that he wants us to, and this is true now today, he will be with us. One of the distinctive things about the people of God is the presence of God. Right? God's just not sending us out there like, oh, good luck, you're on your own. He's like, yeah, but this time, you know what the difference will be? Last time you tried to do it on your own. This time, I'm going to be with you. So I will be with you. This will be the sign for you that I have sent you. This is how you're going to know it's actually true. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this very mountain. So you're actually going to come back at some point on this mountain, on this spot, and you are really going to understand who I am. Verse 13, it keeps going on though. Moses keeps trying to figure things out. Verse 13, then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Right? They're like, okay, so let's figure this out. So I go there, I go to the leaders of the Israelites, and I'm like, hey, God told me to bring you out. What am I supposed to say? Who am I supposed to say told me? So verse 14, this is a really, really interesting phrase, and I'm not going to really do it justice because we're kind of going over this cursory view. But God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said, say this to the people. I am has sent me to you. And this is actually a revelation of the personal name of God here. And we get this descriptor that's just really kind of unlike anything else. Check out the notes. It has some kind of cool notes and it says, I am that I am, the revelation of the personal name of God, Israel's creator. In Hebrew, the phrase I am is different from Yahweh, okay? But there's a relationship to them. But they both involve the consonants, right? Kind of gets into the description of stuff. But God's kind of talking about himself in there, right? I am who I am. I'm the one that started it all. I'm the initiator of things. This is who you're supposed to tell them sent you for this all. I am has sent me to you. So verse 15, it says, God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, okay, Yahweh, capital Lord, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever. Okay, so I want you to get the understanding, the difference between when we just say the word God. So sometimes we take the word God, and when we say that in our culture, it means like, the ultimate being, the creator of the universe, the all-powerful being and stuff. Now in their context, there was all kinds of competing gods with different names, different titles. The Egyptians would have had all these different gods. They had, Ra, the sun god, all these different things. And we're going to actually see kind of the God of Israel, the Yahweh. He's going to take it to the gods later on in the story. But this is really important for us to understand when we see this term Yahweh, that's his name, right? So like I'm a human, okay, that would be a descriptor of me. But my name is Dusty. Okay, so this is kind of the same thing. When we see the word God, that's kind of like a descriptor of what he's like. It's a spiritual being is how the Bible uses it. So God is this spiritual being, but he's got a name. And his name is Yahweh. And this name describes who he is. Like, I am who I am, right? I'm the initiator. I'm the creator and stuff. And so when he's referring to himself, he refers to himself as that. And when the Jews refer to him, hey, they refer to him as Yahweh, right? As like I said, indicated in our Bible, whenever there's a capital Lord, which you see, right, in verse 1 or verse 15 and verse, where else is that? Anyway, there's a couple different times in there where it uses that capital Lord. So when you see a lowercase Lord, that just means master, is how you translate it, right? So there's kind of different terms in here and stuff, but I want us to be understanding of that. So here's who has sent him. Okay, verse 16. So here's what he says to do. Okay, so here's who I am. Here's my name. Verse 16. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, okay, see that term again, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt. Right? So God has been seeing all that's been happening. Verse 17, it says, and I promise that I promise, right? God's declaring his promise. God can't lie. I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. This promised land that was agreed upon that I was going to give to your ancestors, and now you've been in Egypt for 400 years, okay, roughly. Verse 18, it says, and they will listen to your voice. And now this is kind of God speaking to Moses now. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, right? So now it's like, okay, so Moses, I'm going there. I'm going to talk to the elders. I'm going to say, here's who it is who sent me. And now we're going to take them, and now we're going to go to the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh. Right? And so you're going to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Right? So the first kind of ask is like, hey, we want to just go and we want to make this sacrifice to this specific God. Remember, so this would have been a God, the name of the God, the Pharaoh would have been like, who? Right? Like, I don't know who this one is. Verse 19, it says, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So the king isn't just going to be like, oh, great. Yep, go ahead and take off. Yeah, that's a great deal. He says, I know him. I know he's not going to go along with that plan. And so he's got to be compelled by a mighty hand. Here's what that means. What is that? What does it mean, compelled by a mighty hand? Verse 20 says, so I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he'll let you go. Right? So we get this kind of picture, like God's not actually physically using his hand, but he's kind of giving us an image like, hey, God's handiwork, God's fingerprint is going to be all over this, and he's going to do this kind of stuff. He says, I'm going to strike Egypt with all the wonders, okay, with all these things, and then he's going to let you go. Verse 21, and it says, even more so, and I will give this people favor, talking about the Jews, in the sight of Egyptians, and when you go, you shall not go empty. So it's going to be such a miraculous thing that when you do go, the Egyptians are going to be favorable toward you, and you're not going to go empty-handed. They're going to give you a bunch of stuff. Verse 22, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. And so God is going to do this miraculous thing in such a way that you're going to go out and the Egyptians are going to be handing over their stuff to you. And you're kind of going to go out from being slaves to being somewhat wealthy because they're going to give you all this stuff. This is just kind of this incredible thought. So imagine Moses hearing this, burning bush talking. All of a sudden it's like, oh no, this is God talking to me. And he has this amazing plan for the Egyptians. And he's inviting me to say, hey, and you're going to lead this whole thing. I mean, that's just going to be kind of a mind-blowing thing for Moses of just trying to wrap your head around all that is going and how this is going to work. And I'm sure there's more questions, right? Like he's asking all these questions like, what's going on here? How am I going to do this? Like, why would anyone listen to me? I don't know about this, God. And we kind of do the same thing because, what God has invited us into do, right? And so we get the New Testament, we get Jesus, and Jesus kind of functions as a better Moses. He's invited us into, hey, I have this plan for you. You're going to partner with me. So this is how God works throughout the entire Bible. Okay, this is true throughout the entire Bible, is God has this plan for humanity. And God's plan for humanity is, how are we going to be in relationship with him? God's made us to be in relationship with him, and then to be representatives of him on earth. Like that's the whole plan of humanity. From the beginning of the Bible to the very end, is God has delegated his authority to humans and says, hey, I want to work with you to accomplish my plans. Okay, God doesn't need us to accomplish his plans, right? God can do whatever he wants. He's all powerful. But the amazing thing is God includes us. He says, I want you to be included with what I'm doing. Because that's how I'm in relationship with you. That's how I reveal my love to you. That's how a relationship works. And so we see that happening in this story with Moses. God says, my promise, Moses, I will be with you through it all. I don't know what you've been going through. I don't know what life has been bringing. But the promise we see in this story here is the God of the universe wants to be in relationship with us and says, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to go with you through it. And my hand can do all these things. I can arrange things. Okay? We see God's sovereignty in here. God's sovereignty means that he can arrange things for his will and purposes. And in a way, like, it doesn't even matter what we do in a way. Like, I can still get what he wants accomplished to happen. And, which is different than us. Like, we don't have that ability. We don't have that power. We try to manipulate things sometimes, but we don't have that power where God's like, hey, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what's going to happen. Moses, you're going to end up on this mountain, the same one that you see in this burning bush here. And then you're going to see and know, like, man, this is how I'm going to know this God. But really, there's a lot of faith in there as well. He's like, you're not going to know until you get back up here, right? And sometimes we're like, and I think Moses here is like, hey, I want a little more than that. If I'm going to go show up to the Pharaoh and the elders, last time I'm there, they had a death wish out for me. There was, this plot that they were going to kill me, and you want me to show up there. I have these questions, and it's very real. Like Moses just kind of wrestling it. We often hear of Moses like, oh, Moses the great, one of the all-time prophets, right? He must have always followed God. He must have always had this faith. And we don't see it happen until he was 80. And he's at the beginning of it, he's questioning things. God, I don't know about this. I don't know about your plan. I don't know I just don't know how I'm going to fit in there. And we see that person grow into, one of the great prophets of all time. And this should be kind of an encouragement for us, because God is calling you into something to be part of his purpose, part of his plan. And there needs to be some level of willingness. But God's okay with like, hey, I'm going to talk you through it. I'm going to work it out. Because sometimes we doubt. Sometimes we have these questions. But in the end, God says, don't worry. The one thing I can guarantee you is I'm going to be with you. I will be with you. That sounds kind of a lot like Jesus when he gives the Great Commission, right? Go therefore, make disciples, baptizing them, teaching them to obey all my commands. And I will be with you to the very end of this age. And we have a God in the Bible that loves us, wants to be with us, wants to be in relationship with us.